After 2 years, I finally took time out of my schedule to catch up to Jujutsu Kaisen. When will I catch up to Kingdom? The world may never know. And a real quick but important announcement, I am having a anime watch party for Steins Gate in the server. However, it is a Patreon exclusive server, so if you feel like supporting the channel or being a part of the watch party, the Patreon will be down in the links in the description below. JJK, along with Chainsaw Man, was a manga that burst into the scene around 2 years ago, and one of the main things that was talked about regarding the series within its origins was the similarities it had to some of its predecessors, in particular Hunter x Hunter and Bleach. Fast forward 2 years later, and now Jujutsu Kaisen is a series that I think has really established itself in developing a personality that, although yes, you can see the clear inspirations, it has separated itself from its predecessors and developed a really strong identity of its own. Okay, really quick, just to clarify, I know the series has been going on longer than 2 years, but I'm referring to it kind of bursting into popularity due to the anime. Just wanted to clarify that so I don't get a ton of comment. Alright, back to the video. It's a really engaging and thrilling blend of battle shonen with elements of horror that always provide imagery that I love to look at when I'm going through the series. The first 40 to 50 or so chapters are okay, but again, that's just the introductory part of the story where we're getting used to the world, the characters, and it does manage to hook us nonetheless with a very good premise with Itadori's dilemma, as well as a character who's an absolute blast to see, and that's Gojo, along with an antagonistic force that is clearly growing and building and building and building throughout this entire section. Now, I didn't read JJK Zero before I read just Jujutsu Kaisen. I read JJK Zero once I had reached the Culling Games, and Yuta was reintroduced to the story, so I will touch on that later. But for this first section of Jujutsu Kaisen, I do find it to have characters that I did enjoy, but I was more so excited to see what direction they were going to go in, especially characters like Itadori, Megumi, and Maki. The next portion of the story where we kind of have this flashback arc is where the story really does kick up for me, and this entire conflict where we see Gojo and Geto working together to basically protect this individual, and they end up having to deal with Toji, who is Megumi's father, which was a really fun and cool concept, and immediately Toji is a fan favorite character, and one can see why. Overall, I really love the conflict in this arc. Again, Toji as a character being introduced was just this lightning in the bottle moment, which you had to enjoy. To have a little more with Gojo's character, I think, was massive as well before what would happen in the next arc, and seeing the motivation behind Geto's character, I really did enjoy as well. And I'll touch on this a little more later, but that is one of the strengths of this series, is its ability to focus on other characters and really allow them to have their moments to shine. That way it isn't just a story that purely follows everything from Itadori's perspective. And after this flashback arc, we then get the turning point of the series, the Shibuya incident arc. This is, okay, where do I want to start, because it's a lot. So we have a group of Mahito, Jogo, and Geto all devising this plan to essentially seal Gojo and get Sukuna on their side. And they follow through with the first part. They do manage to end up sealing Gojo up, which I think is huge for the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, given that up to this point in the story, he's pretty much a safety net. Any sort of antagonistic force or any bit of opposition that happens could be instantly nullified as soon as he shows up. Therefore, any sort of major conflict that could potentially push Itadori as a character is instantly thrown out the window, as long as just Gojo shows up and handles it. And so when Gojo is sealed up, now the antagonistic group is free to just absolutely wreak havoc, and Mahito specifically seems to have a lot of fun in doing so. And so a lot of people die, and I mean a lot of people, and a lot of rather important characters in the story die as well. And this isn't something that I entirely expected, although the series has previously established itself as one that isn't scared to kill off characters, which, look, let me just make this clear. Killing off characters for the sake of it isn't automatically a good thing. However, using the death of a character to further push a conflict between a protagonist and an antagonist, or to simply add the reality of stakes within this world, I think is a massive positive, because any sort of conflict we go into the future, we have a precedent set that the author is not scared to kill a character in order to show that the antagonist is really a force to be reckoned with. And I think this is something that could get lost in the mix due to all of the different things that could be happening within the story. And again, considering that we had an entire arc dedicated to characters not Itadori, we sort of missed this sort of slow progression of Itadori becoming more and more, what's the word I want to use? It's like if you sort of noticed a homie of yours was having a really bad sleep schedule, and you could just see like the wear and tear in his face. But Itadori is a character who was originally introduced as incredibly optimistic and bright And at this point in the story and from now on, we get a much bigger seriousness with his character. I think at the reality that who he is and the condition that he's in will have more consequences far beyond just himself. And I really love the way that the story's also been building up to this whole thing with Sukuna, and the dynamic between him and Itadori I find to be incredibly refreshing as well. Especially at the one point early on in the story where Itadori does try to gain help from Sukuna, and Sukuna's just like, nah, you beat, bro, and that's it. That's pretty much their dynamic. In no way, shape, or form is Sukuna there to help Itadori unless there's some sort of large personal gain in it of it for himself. Again, this is something that I was referring to regarding separating itself and forming its own identity, as this is very different from what we typically see from the whole inner demon trope within a character, at least regarding the mainstream shonen titles. This entire arc is proven to be incredibly memorable from start to finish. Moments like Sukuna versus Jogo being great as well, and seeing the nature of curses versus the nature of humanity and how they're linked together is something that I thought was beautifully handled in this arc, and that's further pushed when Itadori and Mahito finally have their conflict, and we see the climax of that conflict with Mahito running away horrified of Itadori was really strong points throughout this entire arc, and it really is the turning point, especially regarding Itadori's character and the overall just power balance within the series, instantly adding more tension to the story. And with the resolution of this arc, we then start to get a focus on other characters within the story, particularly Maki, who I think is easily one of the best characters in the entire series. I think her sort of character development is something that was slowly being built up from the very beginning, and in this latter half of the story, in the last 100 or so chapters, we really start to get more for her character, which I really do enjoy. Although this conversation about Jujutsu Kaisen's sort of female cast I find to be a little bit odd, considering that it doesn't really add or take away from the story for me regardless, and I think this whole conversation is due to the atrocious standards set by the mainstream Weekly Shonen Jump titles, but that's a whole other conversation for another time. But I think Maki sort of realizing that she could take the route that Toji took in order to sort of break free from this whole stigma and pressure she has of her family clan is something that I find to be a really compelling character arc. Although I do wish there was a little more subtlety between the similarities between her and Toji. I feel like that's sort of like just thrown in your face repeatedly, when personally, like after the first 2 times, the comparison between the two and sort of their way of going about fighting, it's like, all right, I got it. But she's easily one of the best characters in the entire series. Also, having a character like Yuta reintroduced to the story was great. Now, if you asked me who my personal favorite character is, it would be Yuta. And when I reached this point in the story where he was reintroduced, I asked Broken Ronin if I should go back and read JJK0, which I did. And I am so glad that I did, because just in 4 chapters, Gege Akutami managed to provide a great character and a really great character arc with just that short amount of time. So the Culling Games, which is the current arc which we're in, has proven to be very fun and interesting as well. I don't find myself nearly as engaged as I did in the Shibuya Incident arc, considering that there are good chunks of it where we're seeing conflicts between characters who are just now being introduced and established in this arc, and so I don't really find myself caring as much, which at times could get me taken out of the grander narrative of what's actually supposed to be happening here. But the recent stuff that's happened is actually kind of crazy, which was my main motivation for catching up. Fun fact, I actually got spoiled on what happened in the most recent chapters, so I won't get into it just for your sake. So if you're not caught up, I'm not the one who spoils you. Overall, I think JJK is a story that provides a lot of great fights within its series, and also characters that are worth remembering. Again, the progression of a character like Itadori, characters like Gojo and Toji, who don't need much time to grasp your attention. Seeing a character like Geto, I think characters like Nanami, the character arc of Maki, as well as Megumi, who I think has just been a constant strong point throughout the entire series. And antagonistic forces like Sukuna and Mahito, who have truly pushed Itadori the way that they have. And there are a lot of other characters in between who are given very short moments, but moments that are made memorable nonetheless. I'm really interested to see the direction the story is going to go in regarding the current conflict that's happening in the most recent chapter, and really who's going to make it out alive this time. Yes, this is a series that follows certain tropes and formulas that we are familiar with, but I think to categorize the whole series for what it does similar to other things versus what it does different would be a giant misservice to the series, and more so yourself and your reading experience. Overall, I would highly recommend to anybody to catch up to this series because it's an absolute blast. This has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.